Dear Earthmates, today we are visiting Ethan Siegel. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Perfect. That was perfect, just like the bird.
uh, you are a theoretical astrophysicist, a
I
science
am a
writer.
theoretical astrophysicist. Yeah, for I got my PhD in 2006, and I started graduate school in 2001. So somewhere between 17 and 22 years, depending on how you count it.
Wow, great. And uh, reading your works, is like reading Agatha Christie with great depth. Uh,
Hmm. Well, hopefully there's less murder in my stories and a little, if I could have the same sense of wonder and mystery, that's fantastic.
that's it.
But
That's it.
less crime.
Yeah, no crime, joy. Now, um, let's go back. Shall we go to visit your childhood? I mean, how come
Sure.
did you decide to become an astrophysicist? What was
Well,
this?
what's wonderful about that is the story of how, like for me, like many people, the story of how I got to be where I am today is not a story of like, oh, I knew from a very early age this was everything I wanted to do and I took a clear path. I'm someone that I was interested in a lot of things. I was always very good at math. But growing up, I was born in the Bronx, New York. To I guess my great grandparents had immigrated from all over, from Russia, from Poland, from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and some from California, some from the UK. Everyone eventually made their way to New York. All of my great grandparents wound up in New York. And in the Bronx, New York, all four of my grandparents were born there. My parents were born there, and I was born there. So that's where we grew up. I was the son of descendants of Jewish immigrants who left Europe around 1900 to come to the United States. Um, but even though I did grow up in New York, I've never viewed myself as a New Yorker as much as I viewed myself as a citizen of the world. Because one of the great things about growing up in New York is you are around people of all different backgrounds. You are around people with different skin colors, with different religions, with different languages that they speak at home, with every difference you can imagine is well represented. I grew up with someone whose last name was Kwan, who was half Korean, who was a Muslim. I grew up with someone whose last name was Gutierrez, like super, super Hispanic. I think his family was Puerto Rican, was Jewish. You can't, so everything is sort of mixed together. And today, as an adult, I feel that way about myself. I love to travel. I love to meet people from different cultures, from different parts of the world, because one of the great things about science is science doesn't know anything about national borders, about these artificial divisions we put in place between ourselves. We all share the same cosmic story. We all inhabit the same tiny planet, one of maybe sextillions or septillions of planets in the universe. We all breathe the same air, and if we looked at, like, back in history at Julius Caesar's last breath, uh, all of us have about one atom of that breath in our bodies right now. And so it's kind of remarkable when you think from the very small to the very large, right? To the whole universe down to the subatomic particles that make it up. We all have so much more in common than we have that's different between us. So part of what I get excited about is thinking about that story and wanting to share it with everyone else. I kind of joke to people sometimes that my job is to translate things from physics into English, because I think that a lot of people sort of think about the depths of the universe and the mysteries of existence and all of this as something that oh, that's for the people who study this professionally, who have their PhDs, who spend their lives embroiled in like the tiny minutia of current research. And it is for them, but it's also for all of us. It's for everyone else too. This story of what the universe is, of where it comes from, of how it got to be the way it is today, and of what its eventual fate is going to be. We are all a part of that story. And so why shouldn't we be equal parts of that story with one another? And so for me, yeah, the part of me that loves studying science and studying the universe is definitely like a part of who I am. But I'm also still that 11-year-old kid who left the city and saw the country skies for the first time when I was 11 years old. And I remember laying down in the grass and looking up at the sky, and I remember digging my fingers into the blades of grass on the ground because the universe felt so immense above me that I was worried. I felt like I could fall up into the space above me if I wasn't careful. I'm still the kid who would play. We had this tape recorder that would record your voice. That I would make these little tapes with my grandfather when we were little, and I would be the announcer, and I would introduce him, and he would put on a show, and I would put on a show, and we'd get everyone else who was in the house to put on a show, and we would just do this. We'd start with the same tape, new recording every time we do it, and that sort of performance in front of people, I guess that's a part of me too. So I think the idea that yes, I was inspired and curious about things from a very young age, but also I had a lot of different interests, and I don't think I really thought about science communication as a career for myself until probably I was almost 30 years old. I was already had my PhD. I was doing research, and that was after I had become a high school teacher, which I was before that. But while I was about 29, 30 years old, I was like, I don't know that I want to do research. I don't know that I want to be a professor forever. I don't know that this is enough to satisfy me with life. And I thought about what I could do, what I wanted to do. And with some things like telling the story of what the universe is, what's true about it, what do we know is real, and how do we know it, and what are those next steps we're going to take to find out even more, that's a story that everyone should be interested in and have the opportunity to feel like they're a part of, because it's just as much your universe as it is mine or anyone else's.
Wow, yes, definitely. Um, my main literary project is a multi-genre mosaic epic, starting with a Big Bang, pre-Big Bang. Only, in poetry you can go and be anywhere. So it starts with the moment of the Big Bang and observing, and then the post-human era, etc. I've been working on it for about half a century now, and it's growing, etc. So the joy, I see the joy in you, your joyful personality, and this is, I think, whatever the conditions may be, you have decided to remain joyful. This is a way of challenging the atrocities in the world, I think. This is your mode of vivendi. This is what I feel. I mean, against injustice, sufferings, etc. And you say, I am joyfully in favor of uh, learning and sharing.
Well, I mean, that's a wonderful perspective to have, because there are, you can't be a human in the world and not be aware of the injustices that happen, of the inequalities, of the unequal opportunities that people have, of the fact that there are still people in slavery out there in the world, that there are still people probably as bright as Einstein or Newton or Maxwell or Hawking or any of the great minds you can imagine throughout history, that have lived and died and never had the opportunity to even learn how to read or write. And so, when I think about that, it of course fills me with sadness and a desire to right these wrongs, which of course is, unfortunately beyond my or anyone else's power to affect at this point. But it is sort of a form of it is sort of a form of protest to sort of say, hey, everything that is out there is within each of our reaches, is within every one of our capacities to learn and understand and become aware of and appreciate. And if I can do that, if I can increase people's awareness of what science is and what it teaches us about reality, and I can help them appreciate the wonder and joy of what we know and how knowing things and figuring them out enriches our lives, that's a really great way to look at things. A lot of people, when they look at, is someone scientifically literate, they do this thing that I don't approve of at all, which is they sort of ask a bunch of questions and then they'll laugh or they'll mock at you if you think the sun goes around the earth instead of the earth goes around the sun, or you think the stars rotate around the sky at night instead of the earth spinning on its axis. And I don't think about that at all. I think that someone who is aware of science and what it does and appreciates that knowing things, and if you want to figure something out about the universe, whether it's on the very small scales or the very large scales, you ask it the right question, you put it to the test, and you let it show you what the answer is, and that's what you follow. That process, that's something that I think everyone can appreciate. And if you are someone who may have thought a certain way in the past, but when new evidence, new pieces of information come to light and they come to your knowledge, if you're someone who's willing to change your mind and you say, I thought this when I knew these pieces of information, but now that I've learned this new information, I think this other way, that's the spirit of that's at the core of science, and at the core, I would argue, of many types of learning. Then that's what I'd like to instill in the world, and it's why of all the scientists throughout history, people often ask me who is the one that I admire the most, and I give a very unusual answer. My answer is Johannes Kepler. Kepler was the first person that we know of to say that the planets didn't move around the sun in circles, and the sun and the other planets didn't move around the earth in circles. Instead, Kepler was the first person to say it's ellipses. The sun is at the center of the solar system and the planets move around it in ellipses. But that wasn't the first thing that Kepler said. Before Kepler ever wrote about ellipses, he had this beautiful mathematical idea that he developed. And he said, well, there is this thing you can do. You can take triangles or squares or pentagons or hexagons, all of these regular polygons. These are mathematical objects with 3, 4, 5, etc. sides that you can not only, tile a two-dimensional surface with them. You can not only, say a bunch of triangles and make draw them on a piece of paper and have them all be identical, but there are 5 three-dimensional solids that you can make solely out of triangles or squares or pentagons, etc. And he said, well, here's what I imagine, is I imagine that you put the sun at the center, and then you have one of the solids around the sun, and on a sphere that's inscribed within that solid, you have an orbit that holds up one of the planets. And then you circumscribe another sphere around that solid, and that holds up another planet. And around that sphere is a different one of these five solids, and et cetera, et cetera. And this is where we get the idea of the music of the spheres. This is where we get the idea of, this beautiful connection between geometry and space. And Kepler had that idea, and he named his model the Mysterium Cosmographicum, and he published books about it, and he had this beautiful drawing, and they made three-dimensional models of it. And when he looked at the data, and he looked at how are the planets actually orbiting, he said it's not right. It doesn't line up. And he thought for years, how could I fix this? How could I make this model okay? And to me, what makes him so great is he said, well, wait a minute. I love this model. I thought of it. It's my baby. It's my pet idea. It's something that I have fallen in love with. And still, I'm going to put it to the side. And I'm going to look at the data, and I'm going to see what the data indicates. And then I'm going to go and say, forget about my model. If all I had was the data, what is the data telling me is going on? And that's why we don't remember Kepler for his beautiful but incorrect idea. We remember him for his laws of planetary motion, because that was what he did when he said, regardless of what I thought or hoped for or what my brain dreamed up, I'm going to confront what is actually out there. That's reality. I'm going to confront my model of what the universe is with reality, and I'm going to build the best model I can about that. And that's where we got the planets move around the sun in ellipses. And that's where we got, and they sweep out equal areas in equal times. And so that taught us how fast the planets move around the sun. And he came up with that relationship between a planet's semi-major axis and its period, which explains why the planets orbit in the time periods that they orbit. And as we went on, of course, we discovered the planet Uranus, which obeys Kepler's laws, and Neptune and Pluto, and we can extend it to other star systems with planets around them out there, and it still works. We discovered later that you can derive Kepler's laws from Newton's laws of universal gravitation. But for me, that idea that Kepler had, that I cannot know what the universe is just by thinking about it, just by dreaming about it, that I have to confront it with reality, and that reality itself, nature itself, is the arbiter of what is real and what is not. That is the most profound insight to me. And I would argue that all of the science that has come in the 400 plus years after Kepler put this forth is a direct result of having exactly that realization that he had, of saying, no matter how beautiful your idea is, no matter how much you believe it should be true, the only way you can know what's real for sure is to look at the universe and listen very closely to what it tells you about itself when you ask it, what are you doing?
Wow. Yes, and uh, is there a theater play or TV play about Kepler the way you portray him? Because if there isn't, how about you and I getting together and preparing something? You have the material. I'm a playwright, uh, and maybe we can do something together. This is
Why
marvelous.
not? Why not? We have a universe full of possibilities.
Yes, indeed.
And this is, I think, a remarkable story that, it's not specific to Kepler,
Mm.
with his also multinational heritage of living in Germany and Poland and Denmark over his life. Like that's not the important part of Kepler's story. The important part of being able to say, this is this is what I love, and this is what I study, and this is what I look at. And even though I had this beautiful idea, I'm able to put it aside and come up with other ideas that better match reality. You know, that's certainly not the only part of Kepler's story, but it's my favorite part of his story.
Very striking and really, wow. Yes, and that kind of discipline, uh, discipline in a fruitful, each field has a different type of, or needs a different type of discipline, I think. Um, I think when I ask the meaning of discipline to myself, I say uh, discipline is a mode of life that helps you become fruitful in the area you have chosen.
And it looks very different for a lot of different people. You know, the
Exactly.
way that I practice discipline for myself is probably
Yeah,
different than it looks for
exactly.
everyone else. And as I've gotten older, I've learned that that resting appropriately and devoting time to taking care of myself is a very important part of that discipline, because, you know, when you're young, you have the tendency to, you know, you burn the candle at both ends, and you
Yeah,
feel all that anxiety within you about all the things I have to get done, and you work very hard. And you cannot do that as you get older. You will collapse. And so I think that being disciplined also involves knowing, and this is, you know, relatively new to me. This discipline also involves knowing when to say, I have done enough for today, and I will leave tomorrow's problems to tomorrow's me.
exactly. And uh, your students and readers are very lucky,
Oh, well, thank you.
and I'm
Thank
one
you.
of them, honestly. And uh, when you write, I as if I'm talking to a novelist or a poet, because to me you are a novelist and a poet at the same time. Uh, when is there a specific time of the day you want to concentrate, or anytime whenever you feel like it?
You know, for myself, I discover that I do my best writing. I feel I do my best writing in the afternoon. So in the morning, you know, I wake up, I take care of things in my house, I try and gather my thoughts for the day. Um, and I start doing things that need to get accomplished, but that maybe aren't, you know, the most mentally intense things that I do, because I discover that having that time where I am thinking about what I'm going to work on later, having that sit in the back of my head and letting sort of my mind run on other things while that brews or percolates in the back means that later on, you know, after I've had lunch and taken some of these you know, urgent but not as important things off my plate, that then in the afternoon I have really good time to be productive in that way, to take my thoughts and let them come out of me onto the page or onto the screen. It helps me formulate, you know, how do I want to tell this story? What are the aspects I should be focusing on? Because to tell a very complicated story to someone who doesn't have that same familiarity, I feel like you always have to start somewhere where people are going to feel comfortable. Where are you going to feel comfortable if I begin here? And then if I want to get all the way to here, I can't do it in one giant step. I can't bring you there in one giant step, because it's too hard. It's asking you to assimilate too much new information all at once. So if I can take a small step where you said, well, I was comfortable down here and now I'm comfortable one small step higher. And then I can say, okay, well, now you're comfortable here. Let's come up another step. It might take 4 or 5 or 6 steps, to get to that end goal, but then we do, and you say, oh, and that's why we think the universe started in the Big Bang, or that's why we think the Big Bang isn't the beginning of the universe anymore, and we think there was something else before it that set it up, or some big conclusion that if I had said that to you at the very start, you would have said, yeah, but that's just the thing scientists say. Why would I believe that? But when you can feel like you're taking that journey for yourself step by step, and you can go back and say, oh, well, how did you go from step 3 to step 4? And you can look and see it there and say, oh, right, that's how you did it. Um, that's I think, if I can do that, that means I've done the job I've set for myself successfully. Because for me, I don't just want you to know what we know. I want you to feel like you understand those steps of how we know it. And if I can do that, if I can share with you what we know and how we know it, and you can go out and say, oh, maybe you can go out and say, I used to think things were this way, but then I learned this new things, and now I think they're this other way. That's evidence that learning and knowledge has taken place.
Yes, and before we started recording, in the first few minutes, we exchanged info, etc. I need to repeat that. When I was 11, my grandfather, who was a secular Democrat, a Muslim thinker and author, he was critical of the traditional Islam, etc., as it is practiced usually. Anyway, but he was thrilled with this Big Bang theory, and I remember the moment when, full of joy and enthusiasm, he tried to explain that tiny, tiny little thing that's very condensed, and then the universe. He was thrilled, his joy, his enthusiasm, and he uh, connected it in his mind to the. He said, "What caused that?" God, he said that was his. But I didn't think there was a necessary correlation between the two. But I didn't want to upset him, and so I said nothing. At the age of 70 now, I really think, without any negative feelings, or maybe I don't know what to say, but I think any concept of any notion of God is a blocks the mind. It not only doesn't explain anything, it doesn't solve anything. And so, to my friends from various religions, if they opened up the subject, I say that to say that, okay, God did it. Do you think, are you satisfied with this answer? And so why block this? But unfortunately, Bertrand Russell, one of my favorite people, he said we should learn to deal with some amount of uncertainty. Unfortunately, many people want to be too sure. They want to be sure. They feel themselves comfortable, safe, etc. But then that blocks you. How can you improve yourself? Adventurous, adventure. And science is a verb. It's said to be a noun, but like all nouns, I think all nouns are verbs, actually, when you look closer. Maybe that, that might be the first question in a science class. Yeah. Ask the students, is science a noun? What a verb, an adjective? They say noun. It's a verb. How come, teacher? Because there's action.
Because you
Change.
can do science on things. Science is not just this body of facts, although it needs that body of facts and it relies on that body of facts. It's also a process and an investigative way of thinking about things. You can always take some non-natural explanation for things. You can always throw up your hands and say, oh well, things must have just always been this way, or they're born this way, or God made it this way. You can do that, and as a scientist, I cannot do anything to prove that wrong, but I can also say to myself, I don't find that satisfying. I want to
Exactly.
know if I was truly ignorant, if I didn't know anything about religion or the world or this science stuff, if I didn't know any of it, but I wanted to know the answer to this question, what would I do to figure it out? And if you ever ask yourself that, what would I do to figure it out? And then you figure out what that test is that you would subject this thing to, and you do that test and you look at the results and you draw your conclusions based on that, that's what science is. um, and
Exactly.
you have to recognize that a lot of people, they have their prejudices, they have their ideas about how things need to be, and if you tell them, oh, that's not how it is, it's this other way, a lot of people will sort of knee jerk react negatively to that. So I think there is this sort of artful balance between not wanting to offend people's sensibilities so they turn their brains off and don't listen to what you say. But I think also we want to be intellectually honest with ourselves. You know, they asked
Exactly.
Einstein about 100 years ago, if you, Einstein, do you believe in God? And Einstein responded, I believe in the God of Spinoza. Which, if you don't know who Spinoza is or what the God of Spinoza is, you would say, yes, Einstein believes in God, and this specifically is the kind of God he believes in. But if you read Spinoza and you ask, what is Spinoza's description of God, you discover that Spinoza's description of God is basically he's an atheist. So,
Yes.
you know, I think saying I believe in the God of Spinoza is a way to say I am an atheist without making people who do believe in God turn off their minds and say, oh, he's a non believer, I'm not listening to him.
True. True. Uh, Studying science, unfortunately, is like learning biology, a little bit of this. But how about living science? Absorbing the scientific thinking, scientific research, scientific creativity, these activities, uh, people become even professors of biology or physics, whatever, but without really becoming scientists in the way they know, but they don't live it. They don't. They don't feel pain or joy. They take it. They teach it. They learn. They become. They come.
Well,
Many
I
people,
think that's
unfortunately.
unfortunately true of a lot of people. And I know we're almost out of time, but whatever it is you choose to pursue, it can't just be because you're good at it or you're proficient at it. I think you have to find what you love. And wherever that Venn diagram overlaps between what you love and are passionate about and what you can be competent at, um, that's that's the way to a fulfilling life.
Thank you so much. This is about to finish, unfortunately. Another day, I'll be happy if we go on.
Thank you so much for the
Let's
invitation, and
consider
thank you for
this
having me here. It was
episode one.
wonderful.
We're together. So thank
I
you so much.
agree.
We're together.
Yes. Have a wonderful day and evening.
Yeah, you too.
All
Take
right.
care.
You too. Bye bye.
Wonderful.